One Day at a Time Flock Group, May 17th, 2025. Jesus' prescription for joy that no one can take from us. On March 24th, 1983, Marge was admitted to St. Joseph Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and 17 minutes later, our daughter Amy was born. Only 17 minutes. But oh, what a 17 minutes that was. This evening, Jesus teaches us about joy using the analogy of childbirth. I've read that the pain of childbirth is close to the threshold of human pain, and crucifixion is the threshold. Now, I've never experienced childbirth, but I've witnessed it 4 times. In the upper room, a day before his crucifixion, Jesus teaches his disciples that our extreme joy in Jesus will overpower the threshold of extreme pain and suffering. Even childbirth, even crucifixion, as some of his disciples will one day find out. Now, if you're using notes and taking notes, there is a handout, and you can fill them in as we go along. Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come, but when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. John 16, verses 20 to 22. What an astounding promise. Your grief will return to joy, and no one will take away your joy. And this promise not only applies to the future life in heaven, but our present life on earth. How about an unjust beating and an illegal imprisonment in Philippi? Did that rob Paul and Silas of their joy? Well, you know the story. They sang songs of praise. Man's responsibility, and God sent a surgical, miraculous earthquake. God's sovereignty. Surgical because it was strong enough to break the chains of all the prisoners, but weak enough so that no one was hurt. And God's miracle, coupled with joyful men of God, gave birth to the church at Philippi. So too with us. Metaphorically speaking, all of us suffer pains to give birth to the good works God prepared in advance for us to do. Ephesians 2:10. Grief to joy is a Jesus truth from truth incarnate. Never let the thief who comes to steal and kill and destroy take your joy away from you. Hold on to God's hand of joy as he holds on to you. And therefore, even if you let go, he won't. Even in our grief at the loss of a loved one, which all of us have experienced, we are undergirded by a joy no one can take from us. Nevertheless, we've all lost our joy in the Lord and have been given over to controlling anxiety. During the darkest 21 months of my life from June 2022 until March 2024, I lost my joy in the Lord. Not immediately, but as my trial wore on and my prayers remained unanswered, my joy in the Lord began to slowly dissipate more and more, which was greater than any physical or mental pain I suffered. And to make matters worse, I gave into Satan's lie that, number one, this was my new normal. And number two, that God somehow took away my joy. He left me, and therefore I could no longer taste and see that the Lord is good. But Jesus revealed to his disciples in the upper room and to me later on this truth. Prolonged loss of joy in the Lord is not normal and is, in fact, a symptom that something is wrong. Now, if you recently lost a child or a spouse, there will, of course, be a season of grieving, and there will always be nail prints on your soul. But if your grief never returns to joy in the Lord, then something's wrong. And our goal is to find out what this something is and come back to joy. Johnny Erickson Tada became suicidal as a teenager after her accident that crippled her for life. And Moses, Elijah, Job, Jeremiah, they all prayed to God, take my life. But all of them returned to joy. Therefore, if we're experiencing prolonged loss of joy in the Lord and think that's our new normal, then we need help. And I will not pretend that one Bible study will whisk it away, but we can start the journey as I did in March 2024. I pray every day, even to this day, for my daily joy, much as I pray for my daily bread. And I will remember the day before and thank God for the joy that he gives me and look forward to the joy he will continue to give me. Look, if you've lost your wedding ring, as I did for about 3 weeks, well, you'll begin to pray to find it. And oh, the joy when it is found. So too lost and then found joy in the Lord. Now, when we, quote, lose our joy, it typically morphs into worry, which is controlling anxiety. So let's look at what Jesus extended teaching about worry in Matthew 6:24 to 34. Now, look closely at the 4 places that Jesus refers to worry in this passage. Verse 24, no one can serve 2 masters. And then verse 25, therefore I tell you, do not worry. Now come down to verse 28. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? And then verse 30, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? And then verse 31, so, or therefore, do not worry. And then down to verse 33, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And then verse 34, therefore, do not worry. Do you see that worry is a question to be answered? Verse 28, why do you worry, says Jesus. Oh, that's a good question. He expects an answer. And it's also a conclusion to true premises. Verse 25, verse 31, and verse 34 all begin with therefore. Simply put, Jesus is not commanding, thou shalt not worry. He's concluding Therefore, you will not worry if you properly diagnose and address the underlying causes of your worry. Worry is therefore a symptom that our soul needs attention, just as vomiting or a spasming muscle in your neck is a symptom that our body needs attention. And commanding your body, thou shalt stop vomiting, or your muscles, thou shalt stop spasming, doesn't work, does it? You need to diagnose the underlying reason for the vomiting or spasming. And the underlying cause of vomiting may be the flu, or food poisoning, or cancer, or something else. And a good doctor needs to properly diagnose it, because treating the flu or food poisoning, much different than treating cancer. Likewise, controlling anxiety is a symptom that needs to be diagnosed by the great physician of our souls. Matthew chapter 6, 24 to 34, Jesus diagnoses, far better than any human psychiatrist, the many underlying causes of worry. And he answers the question, why do you worry about your life? And Jesus gives us the cure for anxiety. Pills only mask it. Jesus' prescription for anxiety must be followed for the rest of our lives. So too the pills. Only there are no side effects with the prescriptions of Jesus. If you're taking notes, turn the page. Number 1, underlying cause. Oh, and this is a big one. Trying to serve two masters, which Jesus teaches is impossible. Notice the statement. You cannot have two masters. Not a command. It's a contradiction. Like you cannot have a square circle or be a married bachelor. Logicians call this the law of non-contradiction, and Jesus applies it to two masters and teaches that worry is one of God's methods to reveal that we may be trying to serve God and anything or anyone not God. In other words, two masters, such as money or reputation or a political party or any finite created thing or person. A.W. Tozer makes the case in a sermon entitled The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing, that for Abraham, his two masters were God and the child of promise, Isaac, whom he rightly loved, but wrongly tried to serve. Satan will never tempt you to solve contradictions like squaring the circle or divide by 0. But he does tempt us into thinking we can successfully serve two masters, God and money, a wife and a mistress. And that never works. Not with wives, not with God. Nevertheless, we try, and this leads to spiritual futility and worry and cover-up and lying, even to ourselves. See, it's easy to deny we're serving God and money. Well, not me. I would never do that. But it's harder to deny our controlling anxiety. It's easy to deny sickness, but our vomiting and spasming muscles give us away. Now, more than one godly man confessed to me that the 2008 financial crisis revealed that money had become his God. But you see, long before the crisis, God gave him a warning sign, namely worry, so that his joy in the Lord became as unstable as the stock market. But the crash opened their eyes to the truth. Something other than the Holy Spirit is controlling me. In 1929, and many times since, men have jumped off buildings when the market or their life crashed. In 2021, 12.3 million Americans seriously thought about suicide. 1.7 million attempted it, and 50,000 succeeded. Now, how many of the 50,000 were born-again Christians who strayed from their sincere and pure devotion to Christ, and then the instant they died, and yes, went to heaven, knew that they had been deluded by Satan and robbed of the joy that Jesus says no one can take from us? Terry Caffey, his wife, and 2 children were murdered by his teenage daughter's boyfriend on one terrorizing night. His teenage daughter was implicated in the plot and is in jail to this day. He wrote a book entitled Terror by Night, and not surprisingly, the 10th chapter is entitled Suicidal. But what is surprising is that 4 months after these horrific events, Terry was remarried and in full-time Christian ministry. And he was also criticized for recovering too soon, as if grief to joy must fit our timetable. Has to be so long or so short. Not God's. It's up to him. Paul teaches that Satan's deceptions begin in the mind. But I'm afraid, Paul wrote to the Corinthians, that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. 2 Corinthians 11:3. Like cancer, if you catch idolatry of the 2 masters early before it metastasizes, it's easier to treat. Catch your insincere and impure devotion to Christ in your mind before it robs you of your joy in the Lord. Since I lost my joy in the Lord for the better part of 21 months, I am very sensitive to joy. Whenever I begin to lose my joy in the Lord, I examine the unwholesome thinking that has infected my mind, and I take the garbage thinking captive to the obedience of Christ, and amazingly, quickly, the joy returns. But if I fail to catch it early and give Satan a foothold, much harder to get at it and get the joy to return. Now, please note, the futility of trying to serve 2 masters, in other words, idolatry, is not the only reason we worry and lose our joy, just as the flu is not the only reason we might vomit. But it's a biggie. And it's best to start with the 2 master diagnosis, because that's where Jesus starts. Number 2, and we'll only have time for 2 of the underlying causes in this passage, is little faith. Matthew 6:28-32. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows you need them. Now, little faith is not saving faith, because, well, there's no such thing as big or little saving faith. You're saved or you're not, right? Therefore, faith in this context, says the late Dallas Willard, is equivalent to trust, which means that worry may be a symptom of little trust in God. And the experience of Peter walking on the water is really the quintessential example of both big and little trust. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Now, at that moment, Peter had big faith. He was walking on the water to Jesus, and his fellow disciples, no doubt, were shocked. He's doing it. Maybe we could do it too. Or maybe Peter's nuts. Let's just see how this turns out. Now ask yourself, did Peter think that Jesus would calm the storm because of his obedience? Many do, you know. Think of it, Peter may have successfully walked 25 to 30 feet on the water in a raging storm. Now he's really within an arm's length of Jesus. Did Peter look at the wind and waves to see if they were subsiding now that he was within an arm's length of Jesus? You know, many who trusted Jesus to heal their cancer will begin to look at the wind and the waves if the cancer returns. And when Jesus rescued him, did Peter, well, despite his failure, expect Jesus to commend him? Nice try, Peter. You almost made it. No mere mortal has ever walked on the water. Bravo! Instead, Peter is stunned by a rebuke. You of little faith, why did you doubt? Can you imagine a Christian reporter asking a Christian rescued by firemen on 911 2001, were you afraid? Did you doubt? Notice Jesus did not say to Peter, you of little obedience, but literally you of little trust. And here's the principle. It's possible to obey God's revealed will in the Bible, but not trust God's hidden to us sovereign will for our life. Of course, not trusting God is itself disobedience. I get that. But here's the difference. When we lie or steal or cheat or lose our temper, we know we're disobeying. We may try to justify it or cover it up or lie to ourselves, but deep down we know this is not Spirit-filled Christian behavior. Not so with trusting God. Peter could have protested. Little trust? What are you talking about? I just walked 30 feet on the water in a storm, and you're calling that little faith just because I fell 30-something inches short? I'm convinced that trust was my central issue during my 21 months of horrific testing. In the beginning, like Peter, I trusted God. I had big faith. I, so to speak, walked on the water. But as the trial wore on and became worse and worse, I began to look at the wind and the waves. I began to sink, and I was given over to uncontrolled anxiety. It lasted 21 months. It could have lasted for the rest of my life. But my healing came when I did trust God. Now, I told my story in a YouTube video that you're welcome to watch. The link is in your notes. It's 28 minutes, so I can't tell it now, other than to illustrate how it's possible to obey God, but not trust God. God began to heal me in March of 2025, and the book that helped me the most, apart from the Bible, was Jerry Bridges' book entitled simply Trusting God. And I read it at least 4 times and studied it. I'll end with a quote from the book mixed with some of my comments. I quote, "I sympathize with those who find it particularly difficult to trust God in times of anxiety," says Bridges. "I've been there myself often enough to know something of the distress, despair, and darkness that fill our souls when we wonder if God truly cares about our plight." Bridges wrote this book during the 11 months he watched his beloved wife, Eleanor, slowly die of cancer. So he's been there, to be sure. Again, quoting, "I've spent a good portion of my adult life encouraging people to pursue holiness and to obey God, yet I acknowledge it often seems more difficult to trust God than to obey him." He then elaborates, "God's moral will, as seen in the Bible, is rational and reasonable, but the circumstances in which we must trust God often appear irrational and inexplicable. God's law is readily recognized as being good for us, but the circumstances of our lives frequently appear harmful and grim, perhaps even calamitous and tragic. Obeying God is worked out within well-defined boundaries of God's revealed will in the Bible, while trusting God must be worked out in an arena with no boundaries, where we're always coping with the unknown. And so we must learn to trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus. And we must repeatedly apply this truth to every phase of our Christian life, every day, every moment of our lives. When your spouse dies, you must learn again to trust and obey. When the doctor says your cancer has returned, you must go back and learn to trust and obey. And when your adult children or grandchildren go astray from their sincere and pure devotion to Christ, you must learn afresh how to trust and obey. And when you receive a $5 million inheritance or a settlement, you must learn again how to trust and obey, lest that money become a god. Every day I ask in prayer, what do I need to trust God for today? And even if there's nothing on my docket, no doctor appointments or any other appointments, I nevertheless pray, my Father in heaven, empower me to trust you as I talk to Marge, as I watch the news, as I handle unexpected phone calls, as I read your word, as I exercise my body, as I eat my daily bread, and most of all, empower me to trust you for thinking wholesome thoughts that honor you, especially when I watch the news for the day. For you know every thought and every attitude of my heart. Every day, big or small, adversity or prosperity, every day, trust and obey. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. while we do his good will. He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.